So, welcome and thank you for joining us. We are the largest LGBTQ library in the world. We also are one of the very few nationally collecting archives, and we have our museum with exhibits in various parts of the country at any given time. And we continue to collect and share and protect the history of the LGBTQ community across the United States. Today, we are talking with Jeffrey Seller, who is one of the most accomplished producers on Broadway, having worked with some of the most talented people on Broadway and doing some of the most creative musicals that we've seen, certainly in the last half century. And this is his new book, which is Theater Kid, and it is truly an experience, especially as you get to know him better and then see what he has done and how he makes it happen. Obviously, as they always say, theater is not done alone, so he doesn't do it by himself. But being the producer, he has enormous control on how things move forward. And being sensitive to others and having your pulse on the way things are makes a huge, huge difference in making something a success or a failure. And clearly, his finger on that pulse has made him extraordinarily successful. So, welcome, Jeffrey, and thank you for joining us. I will say that a number of years ago, we met um, in your apartment, which was very nice. Uh, And so, reading the book, there are any number of people that I know, certainly people I know of, stories that I know of. It wasn't all that many years ago that I was having dinner at Fran and Barry Weissler's house in Westchester with um, Christopher Plummer and, oh God,
James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones, who both lived nearby. So that was, as the Weislers called it, the house that Chicago built,
Yeah.
which lucky for Chicago. So I know that you worked with them, but first you started off as a kid out in Detroit. Your big first experience, according to the book, was moving out of one neighborhood into another neighborhood, and that transition really did color a big part of your life.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, as you look back on it, uh, aside from the big tree in the backyard, what was the most significant factor? And did any of that, specifically as you see the world today, influence that desire, that urge to be successful? Or was that always there?
Robert, you just stimulated something that I've never said out loud, but the fact that you defined my first big experience as transitioning from one neighborhood to another made me realize that we were experiencing the inverse of the American dream because this is 1971. And while so many families are rising, we were falling. We were falling because my father had bankrupted the family business through overspending and manic behavior and irresponsibility. We were falling because my father then was in a motorcycle accident, riding a motorcycle my mother didn't know he owned. When the front tire blew out and he hit the cement on I-94 head first. My mother also didn't know that he had a girlfriend on the back of that bike. And as a result of that accident, he couldn't really work and he suffered aphasia and early onset form of dementia where he lost most of his short-term memory, lost a lot of charisma, spark, um, and ability to deal with the world in a pragmatic adult way, he became very short-tempered um, and volatile. And the result of all that was that after living in a very nice middle-class home, we went on welfare. My mother went to work at McDonald's, and we lost that house and had to move to this very small house in a neighborhood that the kids used to derisively call Cardboard Village because the houses were made of tar shingles instead of bricks. Because we didn't have basements to hide in when tornadoes came, our houses were built on slabs of concrete, 800 square feet, because we had carports, if anything, instead of garages.
Well,
And
it's interesting, sorry to interrupt, but as you said, you were doing the inverse of the American dream. But at the same time, when you went to see that house, you met a young man, a boy like you, who showed you the bedroom, and his family was doing the American dream. They were going from a cardboard house to a house on the other side of the tracks.
yes,
And, and ironically, you and he stayed friends and are still friends, at least as I read the book.
yes, Robert. Of course, the boy that I met was the composer, lyricist, musical theater maker, Andrew Lippa. And indeed, his British family, who had arrived in the US and made that their first house, was moving on up. Um, but Andrew and I did stay friends, even though I inherited his teeny bedroom and became roommates at the University of Michigan and ultimately made a lot of theater together, made our first new musical together, and he was my first boyfriend.
And he was the person that you came out to your parents with.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, my first relationship was with Andrew from my junior year in college through age 25, 19 to 25 years old. Seminal relationship that I still treasure to this day.
So from Michigan to Brooklyn and ultimately to success for both of you.
Yeah, we lived at 22 Lincoln Place together for a couple years in between 5th and 6th Avenue and Park Slope. And ultimately, Andrew goes on to write John and Jen and The Addams Family and Big Fish and amazing songs for Kristen Chenoweth. And of course, I meet Jonathan Larson and um, and produce Rent.
And then, of course, Lin-Manuel, who you have an ongoing, I take it, relationship with. I mean, you did a couple of
As
his shows.
given the fact that he spent much of yesterday at my office working on something, I would say it's a warm and productive, ongoing, loving relationship. You bet.
And that is good for the American theater.
Well,
So,
anytime a guy like Lin is writing a new musical, it's good for the American theater. There's no question about that.
right, but in the right hands, it has much greater success rate that it will reach more and more people,
Oh, well, thank you. That's a nice notion, and I'll be humble about that.
as you can be, with at least three or something Tonys to your name. That's humble is nice.
Four.
Uh, Four. Okay, sorry.
Okay, now I won't be so humble, Robert.
So the transition that you make from the wrong side of the tracks in Detroit, you're sitting on pins and needles ultimately. Well, after fourth grade, you do your temple play.
Yeah.
Um, you do other things. You start producing. You get on the board of directors of a small theater company. I mean, you do kind of amazing things and are clearly driven and focused, which is certainly unusual for young people. And how much of that, I mean, my reading the book, it seems that much of that focus came from looking at an escape from your day-to-day life. Theater, performing, producing, directing, sitting on a board, doing all of those things got you out of your house and into another world where you weren't that child, that lonely child that was sitting, not feeling a part of a family that you loved but didn't feel really connected with. And this was this great escape, and it was a career path at the same time where people appreciated your talent and appreciated you as a person, which you didn't always feel, maybe never felt at home as a child. How much of that plays into each other?
I want to add and qualify. I always felt appreciated. I was always treated as the golden child in my family. And I never felt like a part of my family. And maybe it was because I was adopted. Maybe it was because our interests were different. Maybe it was because we didn't look anything alike. Um, Maybe it was because, they all like to watch Detroit Lions games, and I was in my bedroom, making hearts and valentines out of construction paper and putting trees on my wall. Um, and you are asking, a question no one can answer, which is, was the theater a means of getting out of Cardboard Village, or was it a lucky passion that ultimately did provide my way out of Cardboard Village? And
Well, I'm not saying that you saw it as that pathway at that time, but it was an escape from your ordinary life.
100%, the moment I discovered theater, discovered this world of making things, of making a show that requires the Herculean efforts of many people putting together their talent, their skill, their discipline, and working toward a goal that's not just about self pleasure, it's about making a good show for the audience. Right? It's not just about us having fun. It's about we're doing a show in 6 weeks or 5 weeks or whenever, and we have to make it good because we want to earn their approval. We want to earn their applause. And it has a deadline, uh, and it has a big responsibility. And I loved that process. I loved that process of building something from scratch and then delivering it and succeeding. And how do we succeed? By filling all the seats. How do we succeed? By hearing that applause. How do we succeed? By knowing that audience wants to show up the next time we do it again. And I loved it. And it's true. By going to rehearsal, I got out of the house because I didn't want to be in the house. I wanted to get out. And I found great places to go to do something productive. To
What was the
make,
first, when was the first time you felt that feeling of euphoria through what you were doing?
well, it had to be in the first time I was in the Purim play at Temple Israel when I was in fourth grade. When I um asked my father to take me to the audition. Because, I'd seen a Purim play, I'd seen it the previous couple of years, and I loved watching them. And I remember saying, how do the kids learn all those lines? And more important, how do they learn when to say them? And I was just like amazed. So I wanted to find out about that. So I said, Dad, will you drive me to the audition in January? And he said, get in the car. And he dropped me off. He didn't go. He just dropped me off. And there I was. And so I get cast in the chorus of the Purim play, which for our listeners or watchers who are not Jewish, it's our equivalent of the nativity pageant at Christmas, except while the Christians celebrate the birth of the Messiah Jesus, we of course celebrate the time that the great Queen Esther saves the Jews from annihilation from a villain named Haman. Very Jewish.
With her cousin Mordecai.
With her beloved Mordecai. And in this Purim play, the director and writer juxtaposed Purim and Queen Esther against South Pacific. So she was singing about King Ahasuerus. I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair. And I was a sailor, and I guess they decided we shouldn't sing There's Nothing Like a Dame. So we sang a song from HMS Pinafore. We sail the ocean blue in our saucy ships of beauty. So I'd like to say that my first play was a mashup of Rodgers and Hammerstein, Gilbert and Sullivan, and the Old Testament. Kind of
Can't do
perfect,
much better than
right?
that.
Thank you, Andrew Lloyd Webber. He proved how fertile the Old Testament and the New Testament is for musical theater. So that was the first, and then immediately I went and wrote a play. So in the fourth grade,
Adventureland.
I wrote my play Adventureland about my two best friends, Bruce and Jay, and I going on the roof of our woodshed, falling through the roof, and landing in galaxies away, eons away, in a far off place called Adventureland, where we have to overcome many life-threatening obstacles in order to survive. It becomes a survival story. And that just launches me. And then, in the sixth grade, I'm doing the boys' choir concerts. And in seventh grade, I'm in the community theater. And in eighth grade, I'm in the youth theater. And it was in the eighth grade when I was in this play called Popcorn Pete, in which I started observing everything around me. And I said, this is not a very good title. It's kind of silly. And I could tell it was silly even though I was 13. And then I was like, and even though I'd never heard of highfalutin words called dramaturgy, I was like, this play doesn't have enough conflict. Like, what's it about? And then third, I noticed that when we did it, there weren't a lot of people in the audience. And I thought, well, I think we can do better. And I said, who picks the play? And Mrs. Janney, the parent advisor, said, well, we have a play reading committee and they read all the plays and then they recommend them to the board. And I said, well, I'm going to be on the play reading committee. And then, of course, I was the chairman of the play reading committee. And that was when I started to become a producer. Because you know what the most important job I have as a producer is? Choosing the play. What will manifest my values? What will manifest my aesthetic? What stories do I want to tell? What characters do I want to expose? And those choices I make should reflect me and what I want to express in my life. And that's when I
So,
started learning.
how does that mesh with the talent you work with, or is it one and the same? You pick the writers and people who write the songs and the books based on them fitting that paradigm that you just suggested, or where are the compromises? Because obviously in theater there have to be compromises. There's so many people and there's some very big egos, and the talent pool, as big as it may be, is still limited in the sense of everybody doesn't do everything well. So where does it come that, okay, this is the character that I want, this is the story I want, but this is what I have, and how do I get them to meet me halfway? Is that how it may work, or you just don't go there?
Yeah, well, I'm speaking in a very macro way. And what I mean by that is I pursued Jonathan Larson because his musical, Boho Days, which became Tick Tick Boom, which many people know now because it became a movie starring Andrew Garfield that Lin-Manuel directed beautifully, I might add. Um, um, when I first saw Boho Days at its very first ever performance, and this young man, this 30-year-old Jonathan Larson, who I'd never met before in my life, got on stage, tall, lanky, curly hair, big ears, sits down and attacks the piano ferociously. And he's telling his own story about what it means to turn 30, what it means to be turning 30 and be a writer of rock musicals that nobody wants to produce. Can't even get his own agent on the telephone. Living in a fourth floor walk up down on Greenwich Street where the bathtub's in the kitchen and the roommates have to switch off on who can go in the kitchen to shower in the morning. No health insurance. Working at the Moon Dance Diner and asking himself, am I ever going to realize my dreams? And then when his best friend offers him a job as a copywriter at an ad agency, he has to ask himself, do I keep writing rock musicals that nobody wants to produce? Or do I take this job in which I can maybe get a better apartment and a car and go on vacation and have health insurance and like live a life? And he's telling this story through the most amazing songs that make the hair on my arms stand up, that give me goosebumps. And I'm laughing and I'm crying and I'm cheering and I'm asking, how does this man who I've never met, how does he know my story? Because it feels like me. So I wrote him a letter the next day after I saw that play saying, I want to produce your musicals. So that's what I mean when I connect with an artist's work on that visceral level. I bet on that artist. Are we always going, I'm not going to write the characters. I'm not going to write the songs. And I might like some songs and I might not like some songs. And I'll make some suggestions and I'll make some recommendations. And when they ask for my opinion, I will offer it. But of course, they're going to do it. But I bet on them because they do something inside of me. They evoke my emotions and my senses. And that's how I decide to do something. It's visceral, it's not intellectual.
So, with that feeling and with that passion, what made you stop being a performer and a writer and focus exclusively, or as far as I can tell,
Yeah.
exclusively on producing?
Yeah. I think we all find our way in through the most common path, which is to be in the play, because that's where their most roles are, right? Their most jobs when you're, in school are to be in it. There's only one director, there's only one writer, but there's going to be a lot of kids who are in it. So we all start that way. And I loved performing. Um, and then I didn't write a lot of plays, but we talk about the play I wrote. And I directed a lot of plays in high school and then in college. And what I um, ultimately gleaned from all of my experiences acting, writing, directing, writing press releases, picking plays, selling ads at the local businesses to put in the program so we had money for our marketing campaigns. I was doing all those activities. I gleaned that I am a big idea guy. I gleaned as I moved to New York and met people like Jonathan and worked with people like Andrew, um, that my um, super talent is bringing people together and creating a room in which the work that each artist does is superior as a group in their group effort to anything they could do alone. My super talent is creating a room that has that chemistry and allowing them to thrive. And I learned that in my 20s. I learned that from all those experiences. And I'm lucky that uh, I could observe myself and what was going on around me and hone in on what I do better than anybody else. And I had a feeling in my 20s when I met Jonathan that I think I might be able to be the best producer. And that's why I did it.
So now, is that the best producer of anyone, or is that the best producer of what you do?
Best producer of musicals. I'm not the best producer of movies.
No. Have you?
I'm not the best producer of snack products. Yeah.
Although you like them, according to the book.
Uh, but I thought I might have a shot at being the best producer of musicals, of the new musicals. Yeah.
You also talk about how important it was for you to do things that were new, that were creative, that changed American musical theater, and that you were excited even as a youngster with the plays that really pushed the envelope and changed the way the public would look at musicals going forward. So you were entranced by Evita, you loved Pippin, all these things that were different than Rodgers and Hammerstein and Rodgers and Hart. Um, and you found them and you listened to them and you memorized the lyrics and
Yeah.
the songs. And then you come to New York and you have this opportunity, certainly with meeting Jonathan, to realize that potential. And at that point, you were still working for the Weislers, I
Yes.
believe,
Yeah.
and they were not necessarily interested in you being a producer.
Of course not. I
Um,
was a booker, and my job was to book shows and generate revenue. Mm.
no, because I remember sitting in their house and Fran saying to me, we're thinking about starting a boutique film company. You run a film festival. Maybe you should do it.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I tried to explain to her how difficult it was to make movies.
yeah.
And a few weeks later, or a month later, she called me back and said, "You were right. We'll stick with what we do."
Yeah, let's stick with what we do. I agree with Fran 120%. Um, well, you just brought something up that I thought was very interesting because you made a leap from me enjoying and being responding to contemporary musicals, uh, and not, let's just say, Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers and Hammerstein. And if we go back a minute, because I'm also, of course, a student. I'm a student of musical theater, nothing more, nothing less. But the leap that Richard Rodgers made in his own maturation from Hart to Hammerstein was enormous, right?
Absolutely.
He changed musical theater with Oscar Hammerstein in a way that Lawrence Hart had no interest in doing. When Lawrence Hart, when Lawrence Hart basically said, "I don't want to work anymore." And we know he had a lot of problems. He had alcohol problems, et cetera. But, at the opening night of Oklahoma, which was just a sea change for musical theater, because finally we had a real integrated book musical that had that ballet in the second act. And Larry Hart was in the row G, clapping loudly for Rogers. So, you see this huge leap from Rodgers and Hart to Rodgers and Hammerstein. And then you see this huge leap again in 57 when Bernstein, Robbins, Lawrence, and Sondheim do this tragedy musical, this serious musical, this dance musical, West Side Story, right? And then you see this huge leap again when Hal does Cabaret with Cantor and Ebb. And you see a mini leap with Hair in 1967, right after, in which all, so many people said, oh, well, this will be, now there will be all rock musicals on Broadway. And nothing could have been further from the truth. And, um, and then you see the next big leap, which comes in the form of a chorus line in 1975, 76. And what is that leap? It's the contemporary musical. Finally, um, comes to the stage, 17 dancers on a line who are auditioning for a musical. It's happening right now, right here, right now. And these characters open up their hearts to us, their yearnings, their dreams, their insecurities, their shame, and their embarrassment. And we haven't seen that before. And of course, is their costume? Barely. They're wearing leotards, tights, shorts, tank tops, barely any set. And yet, the most extraordinary stories are unfolding on that stage with a score by Marvin Hamlish that, if not, certainly it's not Rodgers, and it's contemporary-ish. It kind of sounds a little bit like today in a theatrical way. And I remember when I saw a chorus line, I just knew, oh, that's what I'm interested in because I loved those characters so much. I used to,
So, what was your feeling about Michael Bennett?
oh, well, I have had the incredible luck in my career of working with Arthur Lawrence on a revival of West Side Story and Steve Sondheim, of working with Hal Prince in the last years of his life, and being close with Hal. And I met Jerry Robbins once, but I certainly never worked with him. But, Michael was the genius whose life was cut short, and we just don't know what he was going to bring us after because A Chorus Line was the breakthrough musical of the 70s. And Dreamgirls was on its way in 1981, 82. And of course, I write about the fact that when the first musical I ever saw on Broadway when I came to New York, because as a graduation present when I was graduating high school was Dreamgirls, which I say is the most exciting experience I've ever had in the theater. So I was, as a young man, kind of obsessed with Michael Bennett. And I actually remember reading all about the development of his new musical that he was going to do in the late 80s, that he ultimately canceled. And then how he was hired and he was going to direct. It was called Scandal, by the way. And and then how he was going to go direct Chess, and he had to pull out, and he said it was because he had angina, but of course, sadly, he felt the need to lie. He, of course, had AIDS, and he died very soon thereafter. Um, Devastating death for Broadway. But look what he gave, look what Jonathan gave. It's not for us to ask what we didn't get. It's for us to celebrate what we got. And with Michael Bennett, it was, of course, it was also Follies with Hal, and it was a chorus line, and it was Ballroom, and it was Dreamgirls. Um, this is a discussion that's title is around Stonewall. And when people, one of the things I'm just jumping in, Robert, that I bring up. So Rent is the first contemporary musical since the chorus line. Basically, we wait 20 years from 1976 to 1996 to get the next contemporary musical. So I'm proud of that. And Rent really is a revival on Broadway of the American musical because by the late 80s, right, Bob Fosse has died, Gower dies in 80, Bob Fosse dies, Michael Bennett dies, Howard Ashman dies, and God knows how many young men died who would have been the purveyors of musicals in that era. And in the 80s, all we have are the British musicals. All we have are Phantom, Saigon, Cats, Les Mis. That's it. In fact, I've said, in the early 90s, we're only doing about 9 million people in attendance a year on Broadway. And the year before Rent, only two musicals are eligible for the Tony for Best Musical. One of them is Sunset Boulevard by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and one of them is a review called Smokey Joe's Cafe, which has no book and no score. And it wins the Tonys for Best Book and Best Score by default. This past year, in 2025, there were 13 new musicals that were eligible for Best Musical. And of course, five were nominated, and a pretty darn good one called Maybe Happy Ending won. So people say, well, Jeffrey, what was the problem? The problem was twofold. And the first was AIDS. Who did we lose? We don't even know.
And that's true in so many industries, fashion,
Yeah. And we lost
film.
audience. We didn't just lose talent and creators, we lost audience. Now,
Absolutely.
the good news is we're back to 14.5 million audience members a year. So the audience over these 29 years has gone up by over 50%. But the loss is incalculable.
Absolutely.
And happily, look how far we've come.
Without a question of a doubt. And through that pain, and Jonathan expressed that pain, Bennett expressed that pain. So many of the best artists who create happiness on one end push you through so much of life in order to get there. But some of that, if not much of that, came from those torturous periods of time that everybody had to live through, as well as your
Yes.
own experience in just the struggle to get someplace where you're not being a waiter or taking on jobs just to eat because you don't want to take a job that's going to be a career that takes you out of the path of doing what your heart tells you you must do.
Well, Jonathan only gives up his job at the Moondance Diner, that famous little diner down on Lower 6th Avenue in Soho, 2 months before Rent opens. He gives it up. So he has that job till he's 35 years old, slinging that brunch on Sundays, which he satirizes so beautifully in his musical Tick, Tick, Boom. Uh, and um, and that was the sacrifice he was willing to make. And because we're recording something for history, I just want to add, if we have young viewers, that Jonathan did not die of AIDS. He died of an aortic aneurysm, which was a freak um, uh, incident that he had as a result of a congenital heart condition he had that he wasn't aware of.
Yes, it's one of those kinds of things that is not discovered unless something else
Unless you
happens,
have an incident.
usually.
And sadly, his incident was fatal. Yes, sir.
That is also tragic, but he also had many people in his life that did die of AIDS.
Oh, Rent is a tribute to friends of his who had
Exactly.
HIV and lived with HIV, and friends who died of HIV. That is correct.
So he was very much tied into that world, which he couldn't avoid being a theater person.
100%. Well, his best friend was gay and had HIV,
Right.
which
And Jonathan, since you're setting the record straight on his death, he also wasn't gay.
that's right. He was a straight guy who was just like one of his characters in Rent, who created a found family of straight people, gay people, Latino people, black people, white people, theys, she's, he's, and all of the above.
So he is the reason that we have this long alphabet.
Well, I think the alphabet may be getting too long and maybe a little bit of simplifications in order, but I'm just an old fogey.
So at the end of the book, as our time starts to move more quickly,
Yes, sir.
in the very end, the last couple of pages, you get very philosophical um, or political,
Both.
and you link in how I don't know, I'm sure it's intentional because you're so smart, but you link in just how theater, the arts, not only impact the world of politics and business, but how the world of politics and business impact the arts. And you talk about specifically Hamilton being about politics, being about politicians, and what happens during that period of time, ultimately culminating with the first Trump election.
Yes, sir.
And how important do you think it is as a producer of such amazing work to keep in mind the social responsibility of what theater and the arts can do to make people aware of their surroundings and aware of what their lives are and aware of what's going on?
How can we, as theater artists, actually affect lives in a positive way? Is a question that is deeply important to me because we can't always do it, but sometimes we can do it. And I'm going to give you some examples, first of all, from Rent. We used to do an education matinee from Rent where kids from the tri-state area would come to the theater to see the show, but they wouldn't just see the show, they would do a workshop in the morning on stage. And one student representative from each school would come on stage and do a performance piece. It could be monologue, song, dance, scene, poetry, whatever. I saw kids come out on that stage. I saw kids do monologues about suicide and suicidal feelings. And I witnessed firsthand in letters and messages kids who considered suicide and didn't do it because rent was their lifeline. Because they looked at the characters in Rent and they saw something in themselves and they said, I'm going to make a family like that. There is a place for me. I know from reading more than one dissertation uh, of PhD students that Rent resulted in more young people getting tested for HIV in the 90s. And we all know that there is a negative correlation, if I can be statistical for a minute, between testing and incidence of AIDS. More people get tested, less people get HIV, right? That's called the negative correlation. Rent helped with that, as did, from my research, the AIDS quilt and the amount of attention that got, as did Angels in America. So rent actually affected human behavior and policy. And Hamilton, of course, did the same thing. And of course, I bring up the night that Vice President-elect Mike Pence came to Hamilton in 2016 because, for better or for worse, or I should say rightly or wrongly, we made a conscious decision to do a speech that night, to do a speech calling out Trump Pence and saying, hey, we are the diverse America of gay people, straight people, black people, brown people, white people, Asian people, Mexican Americans, men and women that are afraid you will not protect our unalienable rights, our inalienable rights. And we need you to protect and see all of us. And of course, that speech was a reaction against all the campaigning that was misogynistic, racist, and homophobic. And that speech that night was one of the first protests against that new regime. And I'm proud of it. It might have helped spawn more protest. And all of those protests, from the moment they were elected to the moment we won back the House in 2018, helped change policy. And I am, of course, sickened, Robert, that here we are again in 2025 having this conversation again. I would like to think that we could have put that behind us.
At least half the country feels that way. Unfortunately, we don't always learn from our mistakes.
No, I think they're going to have to suffer a lot more pain. And
Well,
it's
they were
coming.
much better prepared coming into office this time to dish out more pain. And the opposing side of the aisle was totally unprepared for how prepared the new administration is.
Well, when you're right, they won fair and square. So in some way, as President Obama said, elections have consequences.
More than just elections have consequences. Being prepared means that you understand and take responsibility for whatever those consequences are. And when you have elected officials who were there, who were campaigning during that time, who were part of a structure, a political structure, and really did not pay attention to what was being planned and what was being executed even before the election actually took place, and certainly after the election took place. That is, I think, the biggest crisis that we face, is that the opposition was left flat-footed and was walked over, and then they felt the only thing they could do was pontificate when words alone had far less meaning. When you see the characters in Hamilton on stage talk about words, use their words to illustrate the reasons for a revolution, the reasons for forming a government in a certain way, those words had power because there were actions with those words. Now we see officials using words with no power and no plan. And the juxtaposition of that is startling. That makes your play so much more powerful today than it was even when it came out, because you can see what it means to have that commitment, to stay at that diner until you're 35 years old, because you know that you can't become an insurance salesman or a copywriter, because that will take you away from the dream. These were guys that weren't giving up their dream. They weren't giving up their shot. They weren't giving up any of those things because they knew, like you did, this is what I can do and this is what I can do better than anyone else. That's amazing and not common.
I hope that there are young folks who have that same passion who want to run for office, who want to become the next representative, senator, and president, because that's what we need so urgently.
We need a lot of things. That's certainly a big part of the equation. But we have to also
We
look
were we
at,
were brought out of the wilderness by Bill Clinton because he had that fire. And then we were brought out of the wilderness again by President Barack Obama. And when we and of course, and who brought us out of the wilderness in 19 I'm trying to remember what year 60 hang on no, 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 1940 by FDR. When we Democrats are brought out of the wilderness, it's not by the party, it's by the inspirational leader.
no, there's no question.
It's always by the inspirational leader. And that was our problem in 1968. I mean, I'm going down a history rabbit hole with you, but Bobby dies and Hubert Humphrey's a good guy, but he can't lead.
There may be no doubt about it.
Yeah. Um, so that's what I think about. And, to your point, everything you're saying is true, but it's also true that cutting 12 million people off Medicaid is what he ran on that. So why should anybody be surprised when they lose their Medicaid in the next 2 years?
I don't know if it's a matter of being surprised. I think what it is a matter of, the dumbing down of America has been extraordinarily successful, and
Yes.
people don't know what they're hearing. They don't understand the ramifications, and they don't really understand the language. And that's once again in the plays that you produced, the plays that have won all these awards are clear. The words are understandable. The feelings that you get from the songs are real. They're not imagined, they're not artificial. And that same translation would be nice to see in the real world, that what political leaders say makes you feel. Now, yes, it was true with Clinton. He felt our pain, but then he went and added to it. He had so much opportunity to do so much, and ego got in the way. And I won't go into my dissertation on Mr. Obama, um, but I think that there's a big difference in someone's ability to motivate and to prepare the nation to move forward. And what we saw after Obama was Trump. There was not that preparation that needed to be there. There was not the educational element that you did with your plays. You did education, but it wasn't enough to carry a full country at that particular moment in time.
I used to say in 16, when I was so confident that we would win that election, I just can't believe that the United States of America that loves Hamilton so much could vote for Trump. And boy, uh, was I wrong. And um and here we are.
And here we are. And I am just curious, with all those things that go on in your head, putting something together, uh, wanting to make a statement, but wanting to please an audience wanting to give them something that they can celebrate, where do you see musical theater going when we're in this kind of a situation? Historically, we go for the big body, lose your mind, forget where you are, forget your troubles, and come on, get happy. Although the old version, not the Garland Streisand version, that's a little bit sadder. Uh, where do you go? How do you rouse people up, but make them aware and want to fight, but at the same time, not give them just sugar candy? Although I understand sugar candy is very helpful when you're at the Tony Awards.
You need candy because it's a 5 hour evening. Um, I don't have a perfect, I may not have an adequate answer because the answer is going to be in the artist. But we do have to keep in mind that in the art form of theater, um, the first thing we must do is entertain. We are not a college, we are not a church, and we are not a city hall. We are a theater for entertainment, hopefully inspiration and enlightenment, and also maybe provocation and education. But we can't do any of those other things if first we don't entertain. And that's what Hamilton did so well. And the same goes for Rent. Um, so what can be our response? There's no question that I think in a climate like today, people want to laugh and they want to forget their troubles. Um, but all I can say for me as a producer is I'm just still looking to be surprised, to have my ear pricked in a whole new way by the music that's coming from the stage. To go, oh, I've never heard it sound like that before. And then I'm looking for it to move me in my guts, or to use a Jewish word, kishkas. How that will relate to our current socio-political economic climate, I don't yet know because I'm not the artist. You know, that's incumbent upon the Jonathan Larsons and the Tony Kushners and the Lin-Manuels. And it will come. It always does. It came from Clifford Odets. It came from Arthur Miller. It came from Bernstein and Lawrence. It came from Sondheim, and it will come again. I have faith.
So, for someone who is a Jewish atheist, that's a pretty good thing to have
Ah,
faith.
you know, it's funny because, of course, I always joke. I say, well, I think that Hamilton was divinely written. And that's from a Jewish atheist, indeed. But you know
No,
what?
it's a good combination.
Well, yeah, as I'm going to guess you probably know a lot of Jewish atheists.
Yes.
We're too logical.
And too much of it makes sense in a different context than the way it's presented to be believed in its entirety.
We believe in storytelling.
Yes. But we also believe in law.
Correct.
And you can understand in those days when these books were written the need to be fruitful and multiply. You can understand the rules and restrictions because life was not only important, but maintaining life of those in your clan was the only way you could expect to survive.
100%.
And with 8 billion plus people, those same rules don't necessarily apply the same way. No
Uh,
one is coming over the hill to take over our town.
I don't think so. Just my general store.
That may be. That may be. So we are at our time. So I do want to thank you immeasurably. Uh, I really do want to recommend to people to get this book. If you have any interest in theater, if you have any interest in the transition from the Midwest to New York, if you have any interest in some of the people who have absolutely changed the culture, it's all in here. And on top of that, you get Jeffrey's childhood, which gives an indication of where things come from. When you least expect it, they go somewhere else. And that's always makes reading interesting. But how you tie those things together, how you make people fall in love with the people that you have fallen in love with, is a tribute to your abilities as a communicator as well. And for that reason alone, this book is extraordinarily worth reading. The history of the theater is great. The history of the times that you cover is great. But the humanity and the recognition that what you're doing isn't necessarily important because it's a play, but it is important because it plays such an important role in people's lives. The way you talked about the shows and the people that influenced you was far more than just the piece of work. It was how it touched you and how touching you allowed you to touch other people and see them and expanded your horizons. And that's worth its place in gold, its weight in gold. So once again, folks, thank you for joining us. I'm Robert Kesten. This is Stonewall National Museum Archive and Library, based here in Fort Lauderdale, the Center for Anti-LGBTQ Work.
Ugh.
Um, Sorry, but that's where we are. This is where the buck stops. Um, and I hope that you'll all come and visit. If you have things that you think should be archived, as I said, we have a national archive. We welcome materials that should be part of the LGBTQ archives. This book will go into our library, the world's largest LGBTQ library, and will be available for people who are members to take it out and read it. So we offer a great many opportunities for people to know their history, know our culture. All of those things are contained in this abundant archival collection, which includes everything from a letter by Bob Dole slamming Bill Clinton for trying to allow gays and lesbians into the military, all the way to Ricky Martin's leather pants that he wore in concerts across the United States. So it's quite a wide range of materials, some serious, some fun. Hopefully, Jeffrey, sorry, you will be able to find your way to sending something so that we can have you in our archive as well. And know that anytime you're in the Fort Lauderdale area, you are always welcome to come here. And you and your family are entitled to a tour and maybe get you involved in some way just to see what we have, since our library and our archives are extensive. And maybe you want to send one of your playwrights here or to do some research on future projects. So thank you all and have a very good night.